in the shuttle program. The crew is go for launch.
Roger. Nice to be in orbit.
We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
It's March 17th, and we're joining you today from SpaceX in Hawthorne, California. We're following along with the Dragon Freedom spacecraft as we await Crew-9 beginning its 10:05 p.m. Pacific, 1:05 a.m. Eastern departure from the International Space Station, with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Suni Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov. I'm Veronica Foreman, a senior sales manager here at SpaceX.
And I'm Sandra Jones with NASA Public Affairs and Communications. It is so great to be back here.
It is really great to have you back, Sandra. And of course, thank you to everyone tuning in to watch live coverage of Dragon completing its 9th crew rotation mission to the space station through NASA's Commercial Crew program. Crew-10 arrived on station on Sunday, March 16th at 12:04 a.m. Eastern. That's March 15th for those of us here in the Pacific time zone. And they will be taking over for Crew-9, who are now headed home.
That's right, and Crew-10 did launch just a few days ago on March 14th with NASA astronauts Anne McClain, Nicole Ayers, JAXA or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. They've spent a couple days in space, with those days docked to the International Space Station being what we call a handover period, where they learn to live and work on station from the crew that's about to leave. Now, the returning Crew-9 members today are NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Suni Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Aleksandr Gorbunov, which you see on your screen right there. Suni and Butch spent 285 days on the International Space Station, where they conducted over 4,500 orbits and traveled more than 121 million statute miles. Nick and Aleksandr spent 170 days on the International Space Station, conducting over 2,700 orbits and traveling more than 72 million statute miles.
The crew is currently suited, and the Dragon and station hatches are both sealed in preparation for Dragon's departure. Once Dragon departs the station, the crew's flight home is expected to last just around 17 hours. Shortly after separation, Dragon will use its Draco thrusters to move away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers, also called departure burns, to increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. Dragon will also execute a phasing burn to lower its orbit and line the spacecraft up with its landing location. Following phasing, Dragon will complete deorbit, re-entry, and splashdown. During the deorbit sequence, several events occur, including trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, deployment of the drogue and main parachutes, and finally splashdown. Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of Florida on Tuesday, March 18th at approximately 2:57 p.m. Pacific, 5:57 p.m. Eastern, where it will be picked up by the SpaceX recovery vessel Megan, and our recovery teams will help to egress or exit the crew from the Dragon spacecraft.
And today on board the International Space Station is the Expedition 72 crew, being led by the current space station commander, Aleksandr of Roscosmos. Last week, NASA astronaut Suni Williams handed over command of the space station to him ahead of her upcoming departure today. Also on board space station is NASA astronaut Don Pettit, as well as cosmonauts Aleksandr, Yvonne Wagner, and of course, the recently arrived Crew-10 astronauts. Now, just like its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board. NASA astronaut Anne McClain helped the crew.
Freedom, SpaceX on the Big Loop. Final reconfigurations for undocked, complete, and nominal. Houston and Hawthorne teams have pulled go for undock sequence start at 0500 Zulu. I'm looking for you to confirm visors down and crew are ready for undock and departure at the planned time.
And we did just hear confirmation that the team in Mission Control and the team in Hawthorne did pull go for undocking. We might hear some continued communications.
Freedom. Visors are down and we are go for undock at the planned time.
SpaceX copies. Crew are configured for undock.
And so that was the voice of NASA astronaut Nick Hague, who is the commander of Dragon, giving the confirmation that they heard the go. So good news, we are continuing to progress down the timeline today for an undocking at 10:05 p.m. Pacific time here in Hawthorne. Now, Mission Control in both Houston and Hawthorne will be backing them up today as we step through undocking. And speaking of Mission Control Houston, let's go over to the voice of NASA, Rob Navius at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, to talk a bit about how the station crew have been preparing to send the crew home and what we can expect from here until Dragon departs station. Rob?
Well, thank you, Sandra. It's been a busy morning so far. About 2 hours ago, the 4 departing Crew-9 crew members did gather in the Harmony module right at the passageway through International Docking Adapter number 2, which connects Harmony with the Dragon Freedom. They had a final opportunity to say goodbye to one another, a final opportunity for the remaining crew members on the station, members of the Expedition 72 crew, to take photographs. As you see there, Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore were already suited up in their SpaceX entry suits. Once that was completed and the crew floated back into freedom, Nick Hague and Aleksandr Gorbunov also suited up. Now, just for the statistic freaks out there, we can tell you that Williams and Wilmore, whose mission, of course, was extended. They launched back on June 5th aboard the Boeing Starliner spacecraft. Last August, NASA decided to bring them home on the Dragon Freedom spacecraft with Crew-9. They will come home with a splashdown on Tuesday afternoon with 286 days in space, a mission encompassing 4,576 orbits of the Earth and 121.3 million miles. But just to put it into context, not the longest single space flights in U.S. history. That distinction belongs to Frank Rubio, who remained on the station for 371 days when his Soyuz spacecraft experienced a coolant leak. He's followed on the list by Mark Vande Hei with 355 days, Scott Kelly with 340, Christina Cook with 328, and Peggy Whitson with 289 days in space. So although Williams and Wilmore have in fact had an extended mission, it's not a record-breaking mission. As we stand by for the final procedures to be encompassed here in Mission Control, you're looking at Flight Director Marcos Flores, who is the lead Crew-9 flight director here. To his right is spacecraft communicator Tess Caswell, who will be talking directly to the crew during the undocking phase and during the time that Dragon moves toward the approach ellipsoid, that mythical line in the sand where we complete integrated operations and turn over everything to the folks in Hawthorne to bring Crew-9 home for its splashdown in the Gulf of America on Tuesday afternoon. With that, we'll turn it back to you guys in Hawthorne and stand by for undocking.
Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks so much, Rob. So as you mentioned, we are standing by for separation, which is set to take place here in a little bit more than 10 minutes. We are tracking a 10:05 p.m. Pacific time, 1:05 a.m. Eastern time departure from the space station.
And as we mentioned earlier, just like during its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board. Departure is typically faster and a little bit easier since the crew won't have to stop at any waypoints like we see when a spacecraft arrives to the space station.
Once the undocking sequence is complete, Dragon will use its Draco thrusters to move away from the station in a series of 4 departure burns, which are carefully strategized maneuvers that increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. From there, a phasing burn will place Dragon on a trajectory to align it with the splashdown site.
At the moment, the crew is suited up as they are during what we call dynamic phases of flight. And we did hear a call out a short time ago for the crew to go ahead and put their visors down ahead of the actual undocking itself. Before they depart the International Space Station, let's take a quick moment to get to know the crew we're bringing home tomorrow for the splashdown rather. U.S. Space Force Colonel Nick Hague is your Crew-9 commander. He was selected by NASA as an astronaut in 2013, and this was his second space flight to the International Space Station and third launch overall. He's spent 171 days in space with Crew-9 and has a career total of 374 days in space. During his mission, he completed a spacewalk with astronaut Suni Williams. That was his fourth spacewalk, earning him a career total of 25 hours, 56 minutes of spacewalking time. Before Crew-9, Hague previously served as a crew member of Expedition 59 and 60 back in 2019. He flew with Aleksandr Gorbunov and NASA's Christina Cook, so this is actually his second time sharing the space station with Gorbunov. The Kansas native is a test pilot and distinguished graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. Nick spent 5 months in Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and he voluntarily transferred from the United States Air Force to the U.S. Space Force in 2021. And he is an active colonel. His wife, Katie, is a retired U.S. Air Force colonel, and they have 2 sons.
NASA astronaut Suni Williams is a mission specialist for Crew-9. This was her third visit to the space station. She originally launched aboard Boeing's Starliner spacecraft and arrived at the space station on June 6th. Following the agency's decision to return Starliner uncrewed, she became an Expedition 71-72 crew member. She logged 286 days in space on this mission. Suni has a total of 608 days in space, earning her the ranking of second most time in space by a NASA astronaut. Former NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson ranks first with 675 days in space. Suni conducted 2 spacewalks and has completed 9 over the course of her career, for a total of 62 hours and 6 minutes of spacewalking time. She ranks 4th on the list of cumulative time spacewalking by a NASA astronaut. Previously, she served on Expedition 14 and 15 in 2007, and again with Expedition 32 and 33 in 2012. She is a retired U.S. Navy captain and a proud graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy.
Next up is NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore, who is also serving as a mission specialist today. This is his 3rd space flight, and just like Suni, he logged 286 days in space. He conducted 1 spacewalk and has completed 5 over the course of his career, earning him a total spacewalking time of 21 hours, 2 minutes. He's flown on 4 different spacecraft throughout his career: Space Shuttle Atlantis, Soyuz, Boeing Starliner, and now the SpaceX Dragon. Previously, the Mount Juliet, Tennessee native served on STS-129 in 2009 and Expedition 41 and 42 from 2014 to 2015. Wilmore is also a retired captain in the U.S. Navy.
Aleksandr Gorbunov is the 3rd mission specialist serving on today's mission. Crew-9 was his first spaceflight to the space station, earning him a total of 171 days in space over the course of his career. Gorbunov, along with Nick Hague, saw the arrival of 4 visiting vehicles and saw the departure of 4 as well. The duo orbited the Earth more than 2,700 times. Before his cosmonaut selection in 2018, Gorbunov worked as an engineer for a rocket space corporation and helped support cargo spacecraft launches from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. There is an amazing amount of diversity and experience behind the crew coming home today.
Yes, absolutely. And so we are targeting undocking today at 10:05 p.m. Pacific, just a few minutes here from now. There will be an undock command that is sent first. That is expected at 10 p.m. Pacific time. And then it'll take a few minutes for us to actually see the physical separation and everything. But we are getting views right now of Dragon Freedom. What you see on that black portion of your screen there is some of the solar rays that help collect power for the spacecraft. That will remain intact during the phasing, which is about 17 hours for this particular flight. But before splashdown tomorrow afternoon, which we are targeting at 2:57 p.m. Pacific, that portion of Dragon will actually be jettisoned. So it'll just be the white portion that we'll see splashdown. But we're not quite there yet. First, we need to have the spacecraft undock. So again, targeting undock at 10:05 p.m. Pacific time this evening.
That's absolutely right, Sandra. So right now what we're doing on board Dragon is preparing for that undocking sequence to be commanded. Undocking from the space station basically involves separating the umbilicals and those attachment hooks that we use to dock Dragon to the space station. So we're effectively doing what we did during the docking procedure here, but in reverse. All of that in preparation for splashdown tomorrow.
Freedom, SpaceX on the Big Loop, undock sequence commanded.
And right on schedule, we've got confirmation of that undocking sequence command.
Freedom copies.
Here in Houston in Mission Control, we are now monitoring the demating of the umbilical. This is the mechanism that provided electrical power to the Dragon Freedom during the time it was docked to the zenith or space-facing port of the Harmony module. Originally, Freedom docked at the forward port of Harmony and then back on November 3rd with Williams, Wilmore, Hague, and Gorbunov on board. Umbilical demate reported to be complete. As we stand by for the initiation of the opening of the hooks, 2 gangs of hooks, 12 hooks in all, holding Dragon to the docking port on the zenith side of Harmony. Again, Harmony was the port of call for Freedom initially when it arrived back in September. The forward port itself, it experienced a relocation maneuver with Hague, Gorbunov, Williams, and Wilmore on board back on November 3rd to move from the forward port to the zenith port, a short spin around the block to reposition that spacecraft where it has been mated and docked to the International Space Station since last November. 3.5 minutes away from physical separation. Once the physical separation occurs between Dragon and the docking port on Harmony, it will begin to move above the station at a very slow rate of about 1/10 of a meter per second. Then we'll move behind the station. A series of departure burns will then put it on a trajectory to carry it below the station and on its way to a safe distance away from the International Space Station for its deorbit burn that will occur at 4:11 p.m. Central Time, 5:11 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday afternoon to begin the final leg of the ride home for Williams, Wilmore, Hague, and Gorbunov. Two and a half minutes to go until physical separation. All systems reported to be in great shape. The latest weather forecast off the coast of Florida at the splashdown sites indicates pristine weather for the arrival of the Crew-9 crew on Tuesday afternoon.
Open and nominal.
The first gang of hooks has opened, standing by for the second. Springs on both sides of the docking interface will push off against one another to initiate that opening rate for Dragon. "90 seconds till physical separation. Heading into the home stretch for Williams and Wilmore, the beginning of the end for a 9.5-month mission in space." The interface between Dragon and the International Docking Adapter no longer sealed. The International Space Station and Dragon flying from southwest to northeast across the Pacific Ocean at an altitude of 261 statute miles.
All hooks open.
All hooks are open. And undocking confirmed. Freedom is free of its moorings. Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore begin their belated trip
Dragon
home.
separation confirmed.
Undocking occurring right on time at 12:05 a.m. Central Time, 1:05 a.m. Eastern Time. Good motion, good stability on Dragon as it backs away.
Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop, depart burn 0 nominal.
Good opening rate reported by the visiting vehicle officer. Dragon's attitude control system functioning as advertised.
Peace and freedom on the big loop. On behalf of Crew-9, I'd like to say it was a privilege to call station home, to live and work and be a part of a mission and a team that spans the globe working together in cooperation for the benefit of humanity. To our colleagues and dear friends who remain on the station, Alex and Vapor Top Grill, we know the station's in great hands. We're excited to see what you guys are going to accomplish, and we'll be waiting for you. Crew-9's going home.
Houston Station on the big loop. Step 2, ISS thrusters are verified enabled. To Crew-9, safe journey home. It's been the honor of a lifetime to cross your path up here on Space Station. Your service has been very much appreciated, and we'll miss you, but have a great journey home.
Crew-9, and this is Zach. I wish we could spend more time with you guys, but many people who love you and whom you love are waiting for you. So safe travel, Godspeed.
And for crew arrival, we ring a bell in Navy tradition, and for Crew-9, I did a baritone salute as you undocked.
Love you guys.
So an exchange of poignant words between the Dragon commander, Nick Hague, as well as the Crew-10 crew, the newly arrived Crew-10 crew members, Anne McLean, Takoya Onishi, and Don Pettit offering their best wishes and Godspeed for a safe return to Earth on Tuesday afternoon for the quartet aboard the Dragon Freedom. Dragon continues an opening rate away from the zenith port of the Harmony module of the International Space Station, undocking occurring just about 5 minutes ago at 12:05 a.m. Central Time, 1:05 a.m. Eastern Time. Now, coming up here in the next minute or so will be the spacecraft's exit from what is called the keep-out sphere. That is the first imaginary line between the space station and the departure corridor for the Dragon itself. That will be followed by Dragon maneuvering to a Sun communications pointing orientation and to enable better communications between the tracking and data relay satellite system and Dragon's communications capability itself. The approach ellipsoid exit, that basically is the end of integrated operations, where Dragon will cross that imaginary line to move beyond the neighborhood of the station, as it were, is scheduled about 14 minutes from now. The departure one
Freedom,
burn now
SpaceX
complete,
on the
all
big loop,
nominal.
Depart burn 1 nominal. Your go to DOF suits per procedure 4.012. And a final reminder that the big loop will be deactivated following Dragon's exit from the approach ellipsoid.
Copy. Good depart 1 burn, and we are go to DOF suits. That's in work momentarily. We'll expect to go off big loop when we get outside the field, sir.
That's a good readback, Freedom.
With all the Freedom thrusters operating in perfect fashion, the acknowledgement by the spacecraft communicator in Hawthorne to Commander Nick Hague aboard Freedom that the crew has been given the go-ahead to get out of their entry suits for the time being, get into more comfortable clothing as Dragon continues its traverse away from the International Space Station. This will continue throughout the course of the overnight hours into tomorrow afternoon, a series of pre-programmed maneuvers that will enable Freedom to be in a position for its deorbit burn on Tuesday afternoon. That deorbit burn is scheduled to take place at 4:11 p.m. Central Time, 5:11 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be a 7-minute, 29-second braking maneuver to enable Dragon to slip out of orbit. Its velocity slowed by 53.2 meters per second, enabling it to begin its high-speed entry back through Earth's atmosphere and a parachute-assisted splashdown off the Gulf of Mexico and the Gulf of America at 4:57 p.m. Central, 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time.
Station and Houston, on the big loop, Dragon has exited the keep-out sphere.
Station copies.
Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop. Dragon has
acknowledging.
exited the approach ellipsoid and is on a 24-hour safe free drift path. Configure comm for Dragon to ground in preparation for big loop deactivation. And Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop. Premature call. We have exited the keep-out sphere but are still in the approach ellipsoid.
SpaceX, Freedom, come check on the hidden light.
Freedom, we have you loud and clear. How us?
With Dragon having crossed the keep-out sphere, next major milestone will be the exiting of the approach ellipsoid to depart the neighborhood of the station. With that, we'll toss it for the moment back to Hawthorne and Veronica and Sandra.
Thanks so much, Rob. As Rob just mentioned, we are now waiting for Dragon to exit the approach ellipsoid, also known as AE, which is another imaginary shape, this time a three-dimensional ellipsoid measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, in the same family as the Keep-Out sphere. It's one of several safety zones set up to govern visiting spacecraft, either arriving or departing the station. Before moving into the Keep-Out sphere or the approach ellipsoid, spacecraft have to be configured where they would not cross the imaginary boundary for a set period of time, even if the spacecraft lost all maneuvering.
That's right, and that approach ellipsoid, once we get past that milestone, will be something that we call the end of integrated operations. And integrated operations means that we are talking to each other on the big loop. So we did hear those communications back and forth. The big loop is essentially not only the crew on the International Space Station, the crew in Dragon, but also both Mission Control Houston and in Hawthorne. Hence the name The Big Loop, because they're all working together to make sure that they have common communications during some of these dynamic portions of flight. So again, we are standing by for approach ellipsoid exit at 10:24 p.m. Pacific time. And on your screen there, we are getting a view of Dragon from the International Space Station, now quite a bit smaller than when we just saw a few minutes ago, undocking at 10:05 p.m. Pacific. Also in the line of sight there, we have a small view of the Canada arm, which is a robotic arm that helps do some maneuvering and is utilized a lot during spacewalks on board the International Space Station. So to recap, the hatches between the International Space Station and Dragon were closed earlier today at 8:05 p.m. Pacific, 11:05 p.m. Eastern. Since then, the crew has settled in and is working to take off their spacesuits for their 17-hour journey back to Earth. The joint NASA and SpaceX teams did, of course, poll go to proceed with undocking, and that undocking command was then sent at 10 p.m. Pacific, followed by umbilical retraction and hooks opening, with physical separation taking place at 10:05 p.m. Pacific, as the space station and Dragon were traveling 261 statute miles off the coast of Guam over the Pacific Ocean. Dragon then completed 2 of 4 departure burns and has exited the Keep-Out sphere, and we are now just minutes away from Dragon crossing the approach ellipsoid to set the spacecraft and Crew-9 up for their path back to Earth. Again, Dragon is targeting to splash down off the coast of Florida in the Gulf at 2:57 p.m. Pacific, 5:57 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, March 18th, marking the completion of a long-duration science and research mission.
Great views right now on your screen of Mission Control here in Hawthorne, California.
It looks like we're starting to get maybe some views there of Dragon as well. These views are being controlled by one of the flight controllers in Mission Control Houston called Cronus, and they help to make sure that the cameras are in position to view not only visiting vehicles that are arriving and departing, but also help to ensure that cameras are in position to get great Earth views, ensure that perhaps if we're flying over a natural disaster like a hurricane or a wildfire, they are ensuring that those great cameras on board the International Space Station are being put to good use to capture all of the science and research that we can aboard the microgravity laboratory. And, you know, fun fact, actually, the International Space Station will be celebrating 25 years of continuous human presence this November. So if you are younger than 25 years old, you have never known a day in your life where there was not a human being living and working aboard the International Space Station.
That is so cool to me. It's just this amazing step forward for human exploration in space.
And with that, we're going to check back in with Rob Navius at the Johnson Space Center one more time. Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Sandra. You mentioned that continuous presence on board the International Space Station. We are approaching the point of the approach ellipsoid exit, which will mark the end of integrated operations with the International Space Station and the flight control team here in Houston. Just a reminder, on board, 7 crew members representing 3 nations: Alexei Ovchinin, the station commander, and his Roscosmos colleagues Ivan Wagner and Kirill Peskov, Anne McLean, Nicole Ayers, and Don Pettit of NASA, and Takoya Onishi of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. Ovchinin, Wagner, and Pettit are next up to depart the station on April 19th. They are scheduled to return home to the steppe of Kazakhstan and a parachute-assisted landing on April 19th U.S. time, April 20th in Kazakhstan. Before that happens, another NASA astronaut, Johnny Kim, along with 2 Roscosmos cosmonauts, will be launching from Baikonur on April 8th as that continuous presence of researchers on board the International Space Station continues unbroken. Sandra?
And thank you so much, Rob, for that update. We really appreciate you joining us here as you spent your evening in Mission Control Houston. Again, we are continuing to get these views following Dragon's undocking from the International Space Station at 10:05 p.m. Pacific time. That sets us up for a splashdown tomorrow afternoon at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time off the coast of Florida. And so we did mention that the crew was busy with a lot of science and research investigations during their time on board the International Space Station. That really is the whole point of the International Space Station, is to conduct science and research investigations, eventually leading to longer duration missions to the moon and then on to Mars.
We're, of course, standing by for any further communications from Crew-9 on board Dragon Freedom at this time. But it's a great opportunity for us to comment on some of the amazing science that Crew-9 conducted while they were on board the station. In total, Crew-9 completed more than 150 experiments, conducting over 900 hours of research. Following their splashdown tomorrow, some of those time-sensitive experiments will be among the first offloaded off the capsule and then returned to various research facilities across the country so that the science can continue.
And in addition to that science, they also completed a few spacewalks, one of which was to actually swab the outside of the International Space Station for microorganisms to see if anything might potentially be able to survive the harsh environment of space, which is pretty interesting. Another one was a spacewalk to remove a radio frequency group, or the RFG. NASA astronaut Suni Williams was able to successfully remove that, which was a big milestone for NASA. And as you mentioned, over 530 hours specifically dedicated to NASA science between NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams. So that just goes to show the great use that the microgravity lab has for science and research on the ground.
I still can't get over that fact that you shared that it has been almost 25 years of continuous operation on board the ISS. That's amazing.
Yes, over 270
Station
people.
on 2 for PMA3 closeout photos.
Go ahead, Ann.
I just downlinked the card with all of the PMA3 and IDA and Dragon Hatch photos, as well as Crew-9 departure. Those are on SSC 17.
Copy, 1-7.
And just want to clarify, also on 17, I did a whole series of kind of inspection documentation photos before departure, and then a series after departure per the instructions. So 2 different folders with before and after photos.
We copy.
And that was the voice of NASA astronaut Ann McClain, who is still on board the International Space Station, stepping through procedures with the ground to wrap up after undocking, taking some photography of the hatch that the team on the ground will inspect, make sure everything checks out just fine. So we are awaiting the confirmation that Crew Dragon Freedom has exited the approach ellipsoid. We're expecting that here in just a couple of seconds here, really. So we might hear that call out here shortly.
And again, if you're just joining us, the approach ellipsoid is a 3-dimensional ellipsoid measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers in the same family as the keep-out sphere. One of the key differences with the AE is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory, which means that the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours again, even if it lost all maneuvering.
That's exactly right. So we'll continue to stand by for that. Now, you may be wondering, what will the crew be doing during their 17-hour phasing? You did hear the call out earlier that they had to go to doff or take off their spacesuits. So they'll get settled in, have the opportunity to have a meal, and try and get some sleep before their targeted splashdown off the coast of Florida tomorrow afternoon at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow afternoon. So we are looking forward to seeing them splash down off the coast of Florida tomorrow. So continuing to stand by for that approach ellipsoid exit. Should be hearing the call out any moment now. And that will really end the portion of integrated operations between the space station, Dragon, Hawthorne, Mission Control, and Mission Control Houston as well.
Freedom, SpaceX on the Big Loop. Dragon has now exited the approach ellipsoid and is on a 24-hour safe free drift path. Please make sure that comm is configured for Dragon to ground.
And SpaceX Freedom on Dragon to ground. Understand we're out the approach. Ellipsoid, 24-hour free.
Good confirmations there, both from Mission Control and Dragon.
And again, we did hear confirmation that Dragon Freedom has now exited the approach ellipsoid, or AE, which is that imaginary shape that's three-dimensional ellipsoid measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers in the same family as the keep out sphere. So one of the key differences with the AE is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what we call that 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. This means that the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours, again, even if it lost all maneuvering.
With that, Crew-9 has officially departed the International Space Station. As Sandra mentioned, it will take them about 17 hours until they make their way back to Earth. So the crew is currently settling, as Sandra mentioned, for a little bit of dinner, or maybe get their suits off before they take some time to rest before returning to Earth. Dragon is, of course, targeted to splash down off the coast of Florida tomorrow at 5:57 p.m. Eastern, 2:57 p.m. Pacific on March 18th, followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by a SpaceX recovery vessel. As they rest up, our teams here will continue to keep an eye on the weather to ensure a safe return for Dragon and our Crew-9 astronauts.
And though our coverage here in Hawthorne today is wrapping up for now, we will turn it over to the NASA team in Houston to take us through the next phases of the Crew-9 mission. Our friends at the Johnson Space Center will provide continuous live audio-only coverage along Crew-9's journey home until we rejoin tomorrow. You can find the audio-only link by visiting nasa.gov/live and clicking the mission audio link, or by searching for NASA Mission Audio Live Feed on YouTube at go.nasa.gov/live ISS.
Meanwhile, we'll rejoin you for live visual coverage starting roughly 1 hour prior to splashdown at 1:45 p.m. Pacific. As always, you can find mission updates on X at NASA, at SpaceX, and on the web at nasa.gov. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you and our Crew-9 astronauts soon.